Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. With all the anti-black racial attacks going on, we need to make sure that we give some attention to the idea of defense. We're going to look at two incidents in particular as a pair of case studies. The first involves Vaughn Booker, an Indiana man who was at the lake with some friends when he was attacked by a gang of white supremacist thugs who actually tried to carry out a lynching. The attack was captured in part on video. You have one black man being jumped on by a white supremacist gang, being beaten to the point that he's got scrapes, bruises, and even a concussion. But the prosecutor apparently had totally different ideas. Rather than go after the attackers, the prosecutor decided that he would charge Mr. Booker with assault of all things. Now, why would the prosecutor do that in what is a clear-cut case of anti-black violence? The prosecutor charged Mr. Booker as a strong-arm maneuver to force Mr. Booker to support dropping the charges, which is what the prosecutor really wants. This attempted lynching was caught on video, so there was no way the corrupt prosecutor could deny that the attack happened. But the racists in Monroe County wanted Mr. Booker to support dropping the charges to give them cover to not prosecute. Now, tell me if this sounds familiar. It's been over a year since this racial attack happened, but the Monroe DA's office has been dragging their feet in regards to prosecuting Mr. Booker's attackers. Instead, the Monroe County DA's office's total focus has been on coercing Mr. Booker into consenting to, wait for it, a restorative justice mediation, which means that Mr. Booker would have to agree to sit down with the white supremacist thugs who tried to kill him and then agree that they should not be prosecuted. That's what restorative justice is. But that was the reason why the DA brought false charges against Mr. Booker in the first place. Because part of it was, well, we'll all sit down and everybody will agree that there shouldn't be prosecution. Well, Mr. Booker, you'll agree that there shouldn't be prosecution, and then everybody just goes their own way, and that'll be the end of that. No harm, no foul, right? Mr. Booker initially started to take part in the restorative justice process that was going to be taking place, but he decided that he was not going to continue with it. And as his attorney put it, we were unnecessary. It was an abusive process and a waste of time. And if this restorative justice maneuver sounds familiar, it should. About 2 weeks ago, I told you about how the restorative justice maneuver was used by a corrupt prosecutor in Missouri after a white cop shot Ashley Hall in the back, nearly killing her. That prosecutor also refused to begin any prosecuting proceedings against the attempted murderer and instead told Ashley Hall that she needed to agree to mediation instead. Now, as I've also explained, normally restorative justice mediation is usually only for non-violent offenses, things like theft, vandalism, and the like. Normally, it's never used for violent offenses. In fact, restorative justice has not been used in Indiana to resolve a criminal case at all. But we're seeing black people attacked by white assailants routinely being told by the prosecutors that they should consent to a restorative justice mediation instead. The message is clear. Jonathan Capehart said the same thing about reparations, you'll remember. Black people just want an apology, not reparations. I hope that we begin to realize there's a program at work here. This is a concerted, organized effort across the board to make it where if a white person kills a black person, then there's no prosecution. And if the white assailant fails to kill their intended black victim, then the DA will charge the victim instead and try to force the victim into mediation, which will require the victim to agree off top to drop the charges against the people who tried to kill them, because that's a requisite for the so-called restorative justice mediation process. This is white supremacy's response to the public mobilizing to see anti-black violence punished. It is a blatant two-tier legal system, prosecution for black people accused of a crime, but mediation for white offenders. And it's making no bones about where it stands. But there's another chapter in this case. The harassment and persecution of Mr. Booker still continues. 3 months ago, on September 9th, Mr. Booker had gone to a local bar and grill. Apparently, some of the staff there must have been friends or acquaintances with the thugs who tried to lynch Mr. Booker because, according to him, they began yelling and screaming racist comments at him. Police arrived, but rather than question the staff, they instead began treating Mr. Booker as the suspect. The police demanded Mr. Booker give them his ID, which he did, even though they told him that they weren't going to lock anyone up, which begs the question, why did they need the ID? By the way, the video of this incident is online. Mr. Booker understandably asked for his ID back because the cops weren't going to do anything, but the police refused. Mr. Booker insisted. After all, the police themselves had said they weren't going to do anything. The police then claimed that Mr. Booker became loud and belligerent with them. This is another police lie. You watch the video and the man was cool, calm, and collected. He simply wanted his ID back. One of the police claimed that Mr. Booker bumped him with his chest, and they had no choice but to arrest him. The video is available to view online. It's the epitome of police instigating a confrontation and then escalating it so they can claim a crime occurred. The DA has charged Mr. Booker with battery. It would be laughable except for the fact this isn't a skit on SNL. Booker took out a GoFundMe, and as he explained in court, he was unemployed and had less than $500 in savings. Now, before you go asking where can I contribute, I would say that it looks like it won't be necessary. For a couple of hours today, in response to one of my subs who asked about the GoFundMe if it was still active, I had posted the link to it, but I took it down after a couple of hours, and here's the reason why. I don't necessarily think that Mr. Booker is pulling an Ashley Hall per se, but rather in the last 24 hours, it's been posted online that Mr. Booker is going to resume restorative justice talks. Apparently, he's re-entering the process again, and at the end of it, apparently, whatever charges are against him are supposed to be dropped. And I do apologize to anybody who might have gone there because of any links that I have posted. If you have, then you might as well go ahead and see about contacting GoFundMe and getting a refund, because it looks like it's not going to be necessary. I guess the Monroe County DA got what he wanted after all. But I'm not going to leave you on a downer. I'll instead leave you with the case of Mr. John H. White. John White was an asphalt foreman who, along with his wife, had made a good life for themselves and a family in Miller Place, New York, a classy suburb in New York State. The trouble started late on the night of August 9th, 2006. Some local teenagers were having a party. Mr. White's son, Aaron, was there. Then some of the White partygoers accosted young Aaron. They accused him of threatening to rape some white girl. This was based on social media posts on the internet. Daniel Cicciaro was one of the individuals who called themselves approaching and threatening Aaron White. He claimed the girl in question was the sister of one of his friends. These violent punks then jumped Aaron White, beating him viciously. Aaron fled the scene of the crime and went straight home. His assailants followed him. A group of violent white thugs got in their cars and followed this young black man to where his parents lived. Aaron's parents were fast asleep at the time. It was 11 o'clock at night. But they wouldn't be asleep for long. Aaron awakened them and told them what had happened. "Some kids are coming to kill me," he said. That's when they heard cars outside, and then angry white voices. Daniel Cicciaro and his pals were drunk, liquored up, and angry and spoiling for a fight. The thugs who had beaten Aaron White were now in front of the White family's home. The hooligans got out of their cars and began yelling for Aaron to come out. This was a modern-day lynching. Like most black Americans, John H. White's family came from the Deep South. They had been part of the great migration of black Americans who fled the violent white mobs who committed genocide across the South at the turn of the century. John White's family had been one of those driven from their homes. His grandfather had been forced to flee their native Alabama in the 1920s by the Ku Klux Klan, vicious white mobs who would attack black homes by dead of night. John White's grandfather taught his grandson about those lynch mobs and gave him something to prevent that from ever happening again. A pistol, and his grandfather taught his grandson how to use a firearm. John White went to get his gun to defend his family. Aaron was beside his father, carrying a shotgun that had belonged to John's grandfather. The white thugs were waiting for them at the end of Mr. White's driveway. They saw he was armed, and they were on his property, but rather than get the message, they instead began hurling a torrent of threats, racial slurs, and abuse at John White and his son. And the ringleader of this racist gang was Daniel Cicciaro. He was 17 years old. His father owned a local auto repair garage. And not to be crass, but from what I've seen of the Cicciaro family patriarch, This guy's got more in common with Tony Soprano. Anyway, the young thug Daniel Cicciaro was the main one instigating the confrontation. He and the rest of his lynch party were posturing threateningly, punching their fists into their palms. John White and his son stood their ground. They told these criminals to leave their property immediately. The thugs refused. Mr. White endured their torrent of racial abuse and their refusal to leave his family alone, but they stayed at the edge of the driveway, so if nothing else, Mr. White assumed none of them would be dumb enough to try to go for his gun. He was wrong. When John White turned to go back inside his home, Daniel Cicciaro, standing at point-blank range, attempted to snatch Mr. White's gun. That's when the gun went off. The bullet struck Cicciaro in the head. He would later be pronounced dead at the hospital. Now, there's no circumstance under which this was anything other than self-defense, but the injustice system is run by white supremacists, from the DA to the police to the judges, and that would be put on full display in this case. John White was immediately arrested and charged with second-degree manslaughter and a weapons possession charge, but in reality his real offense was that he was a black man who dared to defend his family and his property against a white supremacist race attack. And the racist DA and his white supremacist pals in the police wanted to make an example of Mr. White to deter any other black people who thought that they had the right to defend themselves. The punks who attacked Aaron White were never charged with anything. John White was put on trial by an almost all-white jury, 6 white men, 5 white women, and only 1 black man. As I've explained many times, there's a psychology that goes along with jury composition. If you make sure that there's only 1 solitary, isolated black person on a jury, then the odds are overwhelming that the white majority will be able to browbeat or coerce or otherwise harangue them into going along with whatever the majority of the jurors want. And so on December 2nd, after 4 days of deliberation, the almost all-white jury came back with a guilty verdict. John White was sentenced to between 2 and 4 years in prison for the crime of protecting his child and his wife and his home. The father of Daniel Cicciaro was jubilant. He said, "We're going to Disney! Woo!" By the way, that's a verbatim quote. He actually said that. "We're going to Disney! Woo!" And another quote from Cicciaro Sr., he said, "Let's see what happens when Aaron White gets shot." So it's safe to say that the apple didn't fall far from the tree in this case. This entire incident was set in motion because of an alleged threat, and here was the father of the assailant threatening an innocent young man's life. Now, if Aaron and some of his friends decided to pay Mr. Cicciaro's home a visit late one night, well, I'm sure that Mr. Cicciaro wouldn't meet them armed, would he? Now, about the only halfway decent thing that was done during the entire trial proceedings was when Mr. White's attorneys succeeded in their motion that Mr. White should remain free pending the outcome of his appeal. Astonishingly, the court agreed. A rare act of decency indeed. 2 years later, however, the case finally made it to the New York Appellate Court, and the court declined to hear Mr. White's case, saying that he didn't have the right to defend his family or his home, and that all he had the right to do was to call the police and hope they would show up. So you have a lousy bunch of white supremacists on the bench getting on code, sending a message not to Mr. John White, but to every black person in the state of New York that when some white supremacist gang of lynch mob comes to your home to kill your children, you have no right to defend your black children or yourself. This wasn't a judicial ruling on their part. This was a white supremacist message. White supremacist thugs have rights, starting with the right to kill black people. And what rights do law-abiding black citizens have? None. Nowhere in this perverse fiasco did anyone say that Daniel Cicciaro and his thuggish pals should have called the police if they felt that their gal pal was under some kind of threat. Nobody ever mentioned that. The appellate court didn't, the DA didn't, the white media didn't. Call the police indeed. Keep in mind, this is the same New York state where trash like Daniel Pantaleo are on the NYPD's payroll, and I have to wonder if Cicciaro and Pantaleo are related. I wouldn't doubt it. And so, on July 8, 2010, John White was compelled to report to Suffolk County Court so that he could be remanded into the custody of the Mount McGregor Correctional Facility authorities to begin a prison sentence for a crime he didn't even commit. Now, I promise you that we wouldn't end on a downer note, and I'll continue with this story in a moment. But first, a word from the official sponsor of Black Empowerment, Power Tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready, and always carry your steel. Power Tools. Because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work. And now, the fate of John White. John White was 5 months into serving a prison sentence for a crime he didn't commit when on December 23rd, 2010, the governor of New York, who at that time was David Paterson, the first black man to be governor of the state, commuted the wrongful, illegal imprisonment of John White. Now, this wasn't a pardon, it was merely a commutation, but the important thing was that it allowed for John H. White to be immediately released from prison. When the white media confronted Governor Paterson on why he commuted the sentence, Governor Paterson said, "The judge's decision not to impose the maximum sentence was a signal to me that his further incarceration does not serve any public interest." The white supremacists were up in arms. In the police, in the white media, and the judiciary, furious, I tell you. I haven't seen this many white supremacists this angry since they ran out of Miracle Whip at the local Costco. The white media suddenly decided that this story had suddenly turned racial because the governor did his job? Well, in what served as the perfect grace note to the ending of this travesty, Mr. White's lawyer, Frederick Brewington, told the white media, "People have to be careful not to fan the flames of racism. If the governor happened to be white and he commuted the sentence of a white person, would that be an issue?" Mr. Brewington, wherever you are, I tip my hat to you, sir, and I give you a hearty B1 salute. It's rare that someone forces the white supremacists to have to eat their own words. If it's not racist for a black man in a white suburb to be wrongfully charged by a white DA, tried by an all-white jury, and denied due process by an all-white appellate court, then it's not racist when a black governor commutes that black man's sentence. Everyone involved in the administration of this racist lynching by proxy was white. The only non-white people involved here were Mr. White and Governor Paterson. They're not angry for having railroaded an innocent man. What they're furious about is that they didn't get away with it. The corrupt and racist DA of Suffolk County whined that Governor Paterson should have had the decency and compassion to at least contact the victim's family to allow them to be heard before commuting the defendant's sentence. First of all, the governor did hear from the victim. John White and his attorneys have been making the case for his release and for the dropping of all charges for years. John White and his son are the only victims here. Daniel Sicciario and his racist pals were the attackers. Secondly, this DA's office are accessories to a hate crime after the fact. They should be answering why they refused to prosecute Sicciario's fellow thugs for assaulting Aaron White and menacing Mr. White's family. The DA there is a racist liar who abused his position to persecute someone who the DA knew had committed no crime, prosecuting an innocent man when the DA knew that the entire violent incident that Sicciario and his friends set in motion was based on a lie. And the DA knew that it was all a lie. Because you see, there's a little twist to this whole episode. Remember how in the beginning I told you that the rationale the white supremacist thugs gave for attacking Aaron White was that they claimed he'd posted online threats to violate one of their white female friends, Jennifer Martin? Well, as with all of these black man wants to rape white woman claims, this one was just another white lie. Because on November 29, 2007, during John White's trial, Michael Longo, a friend of Sicciario, was called to testify. Longo admitted under oath that he was the one who created a phony MySpace page and filled it with insults and threats which he put under the name of Aaron White. Longo then invited his friends to come visit the MySpace page so that it could be publicized. It was supposed to be a prank, Longo said, or at least that's how he tried to characterize it. That's right. The so-called threat that this was allegedly based on was a complete lie, and the people who did it didn't confess to their lie until they were put on the stand. At his gravesite, the Sicarios put a photo of Daniel with a Bible verse saying, "Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends." Noble words, except for the fact that they're completely misplaced here, because laying down his life for his friends, that's not what Daniel Sicario did. Daniel Sicario died because he assaulted Aaron White and then decided to pursue this innocent man to his home, where he and his pals terrorized the White family. He died in the commission of a crime. He died because of the choices that he willfully made that night. If he had chosen to stay at the party instead of pursuing Aaron White to his home, he would still be alive. If he had chosen to leave the White residence instead of deciding to stay there and confront Mr. White, he would still be alive. John H. White merely reacted to the situation that Daniel Sicario and his friends created. No matter what people may wish to believe, Daniel Sicario didn't die for his friends. He died for the lies that they told. He died for nothing. Now, you'll notice I don't say that this racist hoax is the entire reason that this happened. It happened because white privilege led some racist youth to think that they would imitate what their great-grandparents did and lynch black people simply because. And they found out the hard way it wasn't 1906, it was 2006. If Sicario Sr. wanted to be angry at someone, he should have been angry at Michael Longo. But that thought never seemed to occur to anyone. Now, Longo's confession should have brought the entire sham trial to an end, and Mr. White should have been released immediately. And were we under a system of justice instead of white supremacy, that's what would have happened. But of course, we don't live under a system of justice, and that's the problem. This moment of truth is about the necessity to be ready and willing to defend yourself. Michael Walker, Andrew Coffey, John White. When the white supremacists come knocking on your door, you need to be ready to defend your life and that of your family. Don't wait for anyone to give you permission to do so. In fact, the racist police and the DAs and judges, they will attempt to punish and attack you for protecting yourself and your loved ones. But when you look at the stats, you see that it's much better to be prepared to protect yourself than not. Now, obviously, we can't rest at merely making sure that we're ready at all times to defend our lives and those of our loved ones. The apparatuses of the judiciary have been wholesale captured by white supremacists. Here's the good news. We have it within our power to take them back. The reason that Kenneth Walker is a free man today is because Judge Olu Stevens was on the bench. When the racist DA in Louisville tried to railroad Mr. Walker into prison, Judge Stevens made it clear he wouldn't let injustice stand. But that outcome only happens when we've already got someone in those positions, and as Judge Olu Stevens proves, we can do this. Black people have got to stop making excuses for doing what is required to ensure our safety and power. The reason that Vox Booker is an easy target for the Monroe County DA's office to go after is because there's a racist and corrupt DA in office who is illegally targeting Mr. Booker, and Mr. Booker doesn't have anyone at the local level of the judiciary who will step in and stop what is a clear injustice. Voting at the national level has limited effect for producing results for us, but the truth is we don't need to worry about changing things from the top down. As the old saying goes, all politics is local. The white supremacist thugs with badges who are attacking us, as well as the criminal gangs terrorizing our homes, are not coming from Washington, D.C. They're coming from the city in which you live. And the DAs and judges who are acting as support staff for these race soldiers are also at the local level. Now here's the good news. You have the ability to punish them already. As Dr. Claude Anderson has said for decades, our focus should be on capturing local offices where we have the numerical advantage. We have the numbers. What we need is the focus and the people to put their names on the ballot. It's a fact that when we focus on something, we get it done. Many of you have thought about it. Many of you have said it's something that you've considered doing. Well, maybe it's time to stop thinking about it and start being about it. A lot of people would be willing to back the right candidates if they put their foot across the line. Good day, and be one. Black media only exists because of you. If you appreciate the kind of uncompromising commentary and insight that you get in places like this, then be sure to visit the Cash App and also give the video a like, as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that.